Life stories. She tried to control the neighborhood, but one black man's action turned the tables. In the quiet suburban neighborhood of Hillside Ridge, nestled just outside a small town in Ohio, Jason Parker enjoyed a peaceful life. A high school science teacher in his early 40s, Jason was used to managing the chaos of a classroom full of energetic teenagers, but his home was his sanctuary. After long days of explaining chemical reactions and the laws of physics, Jason appreciated the tranquility of his modest ranch-style house. It wasn't much, just a small, well-maintained home with a tidy front yard and a driveway that comfortably fit his sedan and a visitor or two. His daily routine had a rhythm he liked. He would come home, unload his car, check the mail, grab a bite, and unwind in front of the TV with a good book or a sports game. He'd worked hard to create a space where he could relax and find a little peace away from the noise of the school day. That all changed the day Denise Roberts moved into the house next door. Denise was a new arrival in the neighborhood, a woman in her late 30s with an aura of confidence, or perhaps arrogance, about her. She seemed to have an idea that she could make the neighborhood fit her desires. She was driving a sleek silver BMW X5, a car that Jason was certain had cost more than his entire house. At first, he didn't think much of it. After all, new neighbors could make a few adjustments and wouldn't be familiar with the unwritten rules of the community. But soon, Jason started noticing something that irked him. It began with the BMW being parked in his driveway. The first time it happened, Jason assumed it was a mistake. Maybe she had to park there briefly while unloading something, and it seemed like a simple oversight. But then it happened again and again. Over the next few weeks, Denise's car would often end up parked in his driveway, right in the middle, taking up space where he would normally park. At first, Jason tried to let it go. He was a patient man, and confrontation wasn't his style. He tried to chalk it up to a misunderstanding, figuring she'd move the car once she realized what she was doing. But when it became a pattern, Jason decided it was time to address it. One afternoon, after a long day at work, Jason came home to find Denise's car parked in his driveway yet again. This time, there were no excuses. His patience had worn thin. He got out of his car, parked across the street, and walked over to Denise's house, his thoughts already boiling. When she answered the door, there was that same smug look on her face, as though she knew exactly what he was going to say. "Hey, Denise," Jason began, trying to stay calm. "Your car's in my driveway again. Can you move it?" Denise raised an eyebrow, her expression one of false innocence. "Oh, Jason, I was just dropping off a few things. I figured it wouldn't hurt. It's not like I parked on someone else's property, right?" Her tone was dismissive, as if the request was a trivial matter. "It's not just a few minutes, Denise. It keeps happening, and it's my driveway. I need you to stop." Denise sighed, rolling her eyes as though Jason were the one being unreasonable. All right, I'll move it. No big deal," she said, brushing him off. But despite her promise, the car kept showing up in his driveway. Jason started taking pictures whenever the BMW was parked there, documenting the ongoing issue. Each time, Denise would offer some excuse. She was just waiting for someone or had a delivery to make. Jason felt like a broken record, repeating the same request, but nothing changed. Frustrated, Jason finally resorted to leaving a note on Denise's windshield. It was simple, with bold, clear letters. "Please do not park in my driveway again." But when he returned home the next day, the note was gone, and the car was back, this time parked at a ridiculous angle, as if Denise wasn't even trying to hide her disregard for his property. That was the final straw. Jason had enough. Jason had always been someone who preferred to resolve conflicts calmly. But there was something about Denise's persistent disregard for his space that felt personal. This wasn't just a matter of inconvenience, it was a matter of respect. And Denise, it seemed, didn't have any for anyone else. The day after Denise had once again ignored his note, Jason made a decision. He wasn't going to let this slide anymore. He couldn't just keep hoping things would magically improve. He was going to have to take action, real action. That evening, after a frustrating day of teaching his students about the mysteries of the universe, Jason sat down at his kitchen table, pulling out his phone. He had a quick search through the local listings for towing services in Hillside Ridge, and within minutes, he had found a reputable company. The number was dialed, and Jason made his request clear. He didn't care anymore about being polite or giving Denise the benefit of the doubt. He had tried that route, and it hadn't worked. It was time to take a firm stand. The tow truck arrived just 15 minutes later, efficient and quiet. Jason felt a strange sense of satisfaction. For months, he had been patient, hoping things would improve, but now he knew he had done the right thing. He walked outside, watching as the truck hoisted Denise's BMW X5 off the ground and onto the back of the tow truck. As the car was being lifted away, Jason took a deep breath. He wasn't sure what to expect next. Would Denise come running out, shouting at him? Would she call the cops, demanding to know why he had done this? He couldn't predict how she would react, but he had to be ready for anything. Just as he was heading back inside, he heard the sound of high heels clicking rapidly against the pavement. Jason turned to see Denise storming down her driveway, her face flushed with rage. She was wearing a silk robe, clearly not expecting to confront anyone that evening. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Jason?" Denise shouted, her voice rising in pitch. "Where's my car? You'd better get it back right now!" Jason remained calm, leaning casually against his porch railing. He had expected this. In fact, it was almost a relief to see her so worked up. "It was parked in my driveway again," he said flatly, "and I've asked you repeatedly to stop." Denise scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "You're just going to have it towed? You're making a huge mistake, Jason. I know people. I can have you kicked out of this neighborhood in no time." Jason raised an eyebrow at her threat. It didn't scare him. "You do what you need to do, Denise. Your car's at Sunshine Towing. If you want it back, you'll need to pay the impound fee. But I suggest you think about how much this might cost you first." Denise's face turned bright red as she sputtered in disbelief. "You'll regret this, I swear. I know the HOA. I can make your life a living hell," she threatened. But there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Jason could tell she was unsure of how far her influence would go after this. He simply shrugged, turned, and walked back into his house, leaving Denise standing on the sidewalk fuming. It didn't take long for the fallout to start. By the time Jason had settled into his couch with a cold drink and some paperwork, he could hear the sound of Denise's fists pounding against his door. He waited a few moments, allowing her to stew in her anger before finally opening it. She stood there, phone in hand, looking like she was about to explode. "Where is my car, Jason?" she demanded, her eyes wild. "It's been towed," Jason replied coolly. "You've been parking in my driveway for months, despite multiple requests to stop. I'm within my rights." Denise's nostrils flared as she clenched her teeth. "You're going to pay for this," she hissed. "I'm on the HOA board. I have connections. You have no idea what I can do." Jason simply smiled and closed the door in her face. He had no intention of engaging further. If Denise wanted to make threats, let her. He wasn't intimidated. The next morning, Jason found a letter in his mailbox. It was from the HOA, claiming that his front yard violated the community's aesthetic guidelines. The letter accused him of improperly maintaining his landscaping. Jason knew exactly who had sent it. Denise had found a new way to retaliate. He wasn't surprised. Denise was one of those people who believed she could control everything. For years, she had been using her position on the HOA board to push her own agenda, issuing fines and complaints against anyone who didn't meet her standards. Jason had heard rumors about her, about how she made life difficult for her neighbors, always finding ways to enforce petty rules. But he had never expected her to target him so blatantly. For the next few days, Jason received more letters from the HOA, each one claiming that he had violated some obscure rule or another. His trash cans were left out too long, his mailbox paint was peeling, and even his front porch plants were suddenly deemed unsightly. Jason was growing tired of the constant harassment. But rather than responding in anger, he made a plan. He would fight back. It didn't take long for the neighborhood to catch wind of the ongoing conflict. Neighbors started noticing the flyers that Denise had posted on mailboxes around the block. The flyers were carefully worded, using vague language that suggested Jason was the problem. They asked the question, "Is this the kind of neighbor we want? Should we be tolerating this kind of behavior?" But Jason wasn't alone in this fight. As the days went by, several of his neighbors reached out to him. They had seen what Denise had been doing for years, using her position in the HOA to make unreasonable demands and find ways to punish anyone who didn't follow her rules to the letter. One neighbor, Mrs. Reynolds, a retired teacher who lived a few doors down, was particularly vocal. "You know, Jason, she fined me $100 last year for my garden gnomes being too tacky. I'm so glad someone finally stood up to her," she said one afternoon as they chatted over the fence. Jason chuckled. "I've been patient for a long time, but I couldn't keep letting it slide." The more Jason interacted with his neighbors, the more he realized that they had all been silently suffering under Denise's rule. She had been using the HOA for her own personal vendettas, enforcing rules that weren't even on the books and penalizing people for the smallest infractions. Now, thanks to his actions, Denise's true nature was starting to come to light. At the next HOA meeting Jason attended, determined to defend himself and make sure that others knew what was going on. He didn't expect it to be easy. Denise still had allies on the board, but he wasn't afraid to speak up. As the meeting unfolded, the board members discussed routine matters, until finally one of them cleared their throat and brought up the complaint against Jason. Jason sat back in his chair, calm and collected, waiting for Denise's next move. But what happened next caught Denise completely off guard. The board member continued, "The complaint regarding misuse of property is not directed at Mr. Parker. Instead, it has been brought to our attention that there have been numerous reports of harassment and misuse of HOA resources, including filing false complaints, unjustified fines, and using HOA services for personal gain. The complaint is against Denise Roberts." Denise's jaw dropped as her face turned pale. The other board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them, an older woman, sighed and spoke up. "Denise, we've received multiple complaints from residents about your actions. It's clear that your behavior has caused significant disruption in this community." Denise's usual smug demeanor crumbled. "You can't be serious," she stammered. "I've done nothing wrong." But the board wasn't having it. They voted unanimously to remove her from the HOA board. And just like that, Denise's reign of power was over. Jason couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just about the driveway anymore. It was about standing up to someone who thought they could get away with anything. And in the end, it was the community that had seen the truth. As the weeks passed, Denise made one last attempt to regain some control over the neighborhood. She moved out of Hillside Ridge without warning, a for sale sign appearing in front of her house one morning. It seemed as though she had finally realized that her time in the neighborhood was over. Jason, however, didn't care why she was leaving. He was just glad that peace had returned to the neighborhood. And as for the driveway, well, it was his again, and Denise would never park in it again. Weeks passed after Denise's removal from the HOA board, and the neighborhood felt a strange sense of peace. No more flyers, no more ridiculous fines or complaints. The tension that had been simmering for so long had finally evaporated. Jason could pull into his driveway without glancing nervously over his shoulder. But it wasn't just the driveway that had been restored to normal, it was the entire community. People were starting to open up about their grievances with Denise, and what they had kept silent about for years was finally being addressed. Jason's phone began ringing more often than usual. A couple of neighbors had called to thank him for standing up to Denise, offering support in various ways. Mrs. Reynolds had been one of the first to reach out. She'd even baked him a loaf of homemade banana bread in appreciation, saying, "It's about time someone put that woman in her place." And then there was Tony from 2 doors down, a retired mechanic who had always kept to himself but had a reputation for being a bit of a recluse. "You know, Jason," Tony said one afternoon as the two of them worked on his old Chevy in the garage, "I never said anything to anyone, but Denise fined me $50 for leaving my ladder rail in my backyard one day. Ridiculous, right? She had a vendetta against anyone who didn't follow her exact rules." Jason chuckled as he tightened a bolt on the car. "Sounds about right, but at least it's over now, right?" "Oh yeah," Tony grinned, "and I'm not the only one who's had it with her. You've got half the neighborhood behind you now, Jason. Don't be surprised if you start seeing more people coming out of the woodwork." Jason hadn't expected the full extent of the impact his actions would have. He thought it would just be about stopping the car from blocking his driveway. But what it turned into was a moment of collective empowerment for the entire neighborhood. People who had felt too intimidated by Denise's dominance were suddenly speaking out, sharing their own stories of her petty demands and unjust fines. One afternoon, a few days after Denise left, Jason came home from work to find a small crowd gathered on his lawn. His neighbors, many of whom had been either silent or passive for years, had come together to offer their support. There was Mrs. Reynolds, Tony, and several others who had lived in the neighborhood for decades, each of them bringing a small token of thanks: a bottle of wine, a hand-stitched quilt, a homemade pie. "You've done more than just get rid of that car, Jason," Mrs. Reynolds said, her voice quivering with emotion. "You've made this neighborhood feel like home again. We've been living in fear of her for so long, and now, thanks to you, we're free." Jason smiled, a bit embarrassed by the attention. "I just did what anyone else would have done. She crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it." The gathering turned into a sort of informal celebration, a welcome change from the tension that had once clouded the community. People were talking openly about Denise's reign of terror, sharing stories and laughing about the absurdity of some of the complaints she'd made. The unity that had emerged in the wake of her departure was palpable. But, as Jason had learned, no victory comes without a price. Just when it seemed like Denise had disappeared from the neighborhood for good, the unexpected happened. One early morning, a few weeks after Denise moved out, Jason was sipping his coffee by the window when he saw her car pull up. The familiar silver BMW X5 slowly rolled into the neighborhood, and Jason's heart sank. There was no mistaking that vehicle. Denise stepped out, looking slightly disheveled in an outfit that screamed, "I've been through a lot." Her hair was messier than usual, and her face looked gaunt, as though she hadn't been sleeping well. It was clear she hadn't found a new home yet, or perhaps her plans had fallen through. Jason couldn't help but feel a sense of relief when he saw that she wasn't back to reclaim her throne. She was just here for something else. But still, he knew he couldn't let his guard down. Denise walked up to his front door, and Jason could hear the hesitant knock. He sighed, preparing for whatever was to come. He opened the door slowly, and when he saw Denise standing there, she looked almost defeated. "Jason," she began, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it, "I need to talk to you." Jason didn't invite her in, but he stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her to explain. "What do you want, Denise?" "I'm not here to argue. I need to apologize," she said, her eyes downcast. "I've been a real pain in the neck, and I realize now that I went too far with everything. I was petty, and I shouldn't have used my position like I did. You were right to have my car towed. I've caused too much trouble in this neighborhood, and I'm sorry." Jason raised an eyebrow. This was the last thing he'd expected. For months, Denise had been an immovable force, a woman who thought she was above the rules. Now she was standing at his door, apologizing? "I didn't expect this," Jason said, cautiously. "What's going on, Denise? What's really going on here?" Denise sighed and looked up at him. Her face softened. "I lost everything, Jason. I thought I could control people, manipulate situations, but it's all come crashing down. I've been kicked off the HOA board. My friends won't speak to me anymore. Even my family is upset with me for how I acted. I just thought maybe you'd give me a second chance. Maybe I could try and make things right with everyone." Jason stood there for a moment, weighing her words. This wasn't the Denise he had known. the woman who thought she could walk all over him and everyone else in the neighborhood. This version seemed human, vulnerable. He took a deep breath. "I'm not sure about second chances, Denise, but I do think you need to understand that actions have consequences. People don't just forgive and forget when you've caused harm. I've moved on from you. The neighborhood has too, and I think that's what matters." Denise nodded slowly, taking in his words. "I understand," she said quietly. "I just wanted to say it, and I'm not going to cause any more problems. I'll be leaving for good soon." Jason didn't respond. Instead, he simply nodded, watching as she turned around and walked away, her footsteps growing quieter as she moved down the street. It was over. The days following Denise's brief return were uneventful. She didn't cause any more trouble, and Jason was relieved that she seemed to be making her exit for good. Soon enough, a moving truck appeared at her house, and the for sale sign was taken down. The house was empty, and the neighborhood once again returned to normal. Jason could finally breathe easy. The days of worrying about her car blocking his driveway, the HOA fines, and the petty games were over. He had stood his ground, and in the end, the community had rallied behind him. Denise had tried to control everything, but she had underestimated the strength of those she thought she could push around. And so, with the final remnants of the battle behind him, Jason resumed his peaceful life. His driveway remained clear, his neighborhood was calm, and he could rest easy, knowing that when people stand up to bullies, it's not just one person who wins, it's the whole community. After Denise's departure, Jason noticed a shift in the neighborhood. People who had once kept to themselves began to interact more. Conversations that had been kept behind closed doors were now open and honest. Jason would often find himself chatting with neighbors he'd never really spoken to before. Tony, Mrs. Reynolds, even Mr. and Mrs. Franklin, the couple who lived across the street and always seemed too busy to wave hello. One evening, as Jason watered his lawn, he was surprised to see a small group of neighbors gathered in front of his house. Tony was there, Mrs. Reynolds with her trademark smile, and a few other familiar faces. They were holding a large cooler filled with drinks and a basket full of snacks. "Jason," Tony called, his voice friendly and warm, "we figured it's time we had a little neighborhood barbecue, to thank you for standing up to Denise." Jason smiled. He hadn't expected such a gesture, but it was a nice surprise. "I didn't do it for a party," he replied, though he couldn't hide his appreciation. "I just wanted things to be right again." "Well, you've certainly made things right," Mrs. Reynolds said, handing him a cold soda. "I think we all owe you more than we realize. Denise's reign was long, and it affected all of us, but now we're free." The community barbecue was simple but heartfelt. There were burgers on the grill, kids running around in the yard, and a sense of camaraderie that hadn't existed before. Jason wasn't just a neighbor now, he was a hero in a way. His act of standing up to Denise had united the people of Hillside Ridge in a way they hadn't been in years. As the evening went on, more people arrived. The neighborhood had come together in a way Jason had never imagined. And as he stood there, laughing with his neighbors, watching the kids play, he realized something. He hadn't just won back his driveway, he had won back his community. A few months later, Jason received a letter in the mail. It was a formal notice from the HOA, but this time it wasn't a complaint. Instead, it was a letter of appreciation, thanking him for his role in bringing the neighborhood together. It was signed by several members of the board, some of whom had previously been allies of Denise, and even a few who had quietly supported him all along. Jason smiled as he read it. The HOA, which had been so unwilling to intervene during Denise's reign of terror, had finally recognized the truth. They had seen the ripple effect of her actions and how much she had tarnished the neighborhood's sense of unity. The letter didn't change much, but it was a nice acknowledgement of the efforts he had made. One afternoon, he decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. The streets were peaceful, the lawns neatly mowed, and everything seemed to be in order. As he walked, he stopped at the house where Denise had once lived. The new owners had moved in not long after she left. It was a young family with 2 small children, and they had already added their personal touch to the home. Colorful flowers lined the front porch, and the windows were bright with hanging plants. Jason stood there for a moment, reflecting. It had been a long road to get here, and not just for him, but for everyone in the neighborhood. It wasn't just about getting Denise off the HOA board or having her car towed. It was about reclaiming a sense of peace and respect that had been lost for too long. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to find Mrs. Reynolds walking up the street toward him. "Jason," she said with a smile, "I wanted to thank you again for what you did. I don't think people realize just how much you've changed this place. It's like we're a community again, and that means everything." Jason looked at her, his expression softening. "I didn't do it alone," he said. "It's all of us, really. I just helped light the spark." She nodded. "Well, I think you've started something that's going to last. The good energy here, it's contagious." Jason smiled, knowing she was right. The energy of Hillside Ridge had changed, and it had changed for the better. Denise's departure had left a void, but what came after was something much stronger. A neighborhood united by mutual respect, a shared desire for peace, and the understanding that sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even if it means facing a difficult challenge. As Jason made his way back to his house, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because he had won the battle, but because in the end, he had done something more important. He had brought his community back together. And with that, he knew he could enjoy his quiet life in Hillside Ridge, without the worry of an entitled neighbor parking in his driveway, without the looming presence of an HOA that catered to the wrong people, and with the reassurance that sometimes doing the right thing can have a ripple effect far beyond what you expect. Over the next year, life in Hillside Ridge continued to improve. People smiled more when they walked down the street. Conversations that had once been stiff and forced now felt natural and easy. The community events that Denise had once scorned, block parties, neighborhood cleanups, and barbecues, flourished. Jason didn't become some sort of neighborhood celebrity, but he had earned the respect of everyone around him. People knew they could count on him. He was a man of principle, someone who believed in doing what was right even when it was difficult. And because of that, he had made a lasting impact. Denise, on the other hand, had moved away without leaving much of a trace. Her house was sold, and no one spoke of her anymore. Her petty rule had crumbled. People didn't talk about the woman who once dominated the neighborhood. They talked about the community they had built in her absence. And for Jason, that was the true victory. His actions hadn't just changed his life, they had transformed the entire neighborhood. And that was something worth celebrating. The story highlights several important life lessons, most notably the power of standing up for what is right, even when it seems daunting. Jason's patience with his neighbor, Denise, was tested repeatedly. But rather than resorting to petty retaliation or letting the issue fester, he chose to take a firm but respectful stand. This decision not only solved his immediate problem, but also led to a broader positive shift in the community. The story teaches that while confronting conflicts can be uncomfortable, it is often necessary for personal and collective growth. It also shows that standing up to bullies or manipulative individuals doesn't just benefit you. It can inspire others who have been quietly suffering under similar circumstances. By taking action, Jason changed his neighborhood's dynamic, proving that one person's courage can spark a much-needed transformation. Additionally, the story emphasizes that entitlement and manipulation will eventually backfire when met with integrity and persistence. The ultimate lesson is that standing by your values and maintaining self-respect can bring about not only personal peace, but also positive change in the world around you. If you found this video helpful or thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps more people discover our content. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest updates from our channel. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next videos.